I'm Aaron Day from Make Crazy Days. As my entry for the Made in Wood ToolMake 2015 competition, I'm going to show the build process of converting an old lathe into a 12-inch disc sander. Stick around and see the build. I picked up this old Craftsman lathe on a local auction site for $5, but the tailstock wouldn't lock down, which makes it a pretty useless lathe. I cut the length down to about 2 feet and slipped the tailstock off the end. The bar along the bottom, which was intended to keep the banjo and tailstock upright, was cut off so the tube could slide into the headstock of the lathe. A file was used to remove any burrs from cutting the tube in half, and I sanded the bulk of the rust off the tube. Now it kinda looks like a mini lathe. I created a simple box to mount the machine to keep the bar at 90 degrees to the faceplate, which will hold the sandpaper. I cut some plywood to just over the length of the machine, and one panel wide enough for the machine, and the other panel was ripped in half. Then spacers were cut to the width of the machine, and those were ripped in half also. I used clamps to hold the shape of the box while I pre-drilled. Then I added some glue and screws to hold the box together. I also added a couple of supports midway through the box to add some rigidity. A couple bolt holes were drilled to mount the headstock to the box. One of the holes needed to have a bit of the edge of the box chiseled out underneath to get the nut to thread onto the bolt. I had to put a shim under the tail end of the lathe to keep the bar mounted at 90 degrees. I had some 8/4 14-inch poplar cut off from a tabletop and figured it would work acceptably well for a faceplate to attach the sanding disc. I hand-planed some cupping off the back so I could mount the faceplate for my current lathe. After finding center and marking the holes, I pre-drilled and used some wood screws this time, not the drywall screws I used in the bowl last time. The cool feature of my current lathe is the outboard turning feature. I turned the headstock at an angle and extended the tool rest so I could work on the face. In retrospect, thinking of turning the corners off was not such a good plan, but it did give me a good set of lines to cut at the bandsaw. I also flattened the face so I had a good parallel face to the handplane surface. At the bandsaw, I cut close to the lines from the attempt to cut the corners off. The headstock was returned to the normal position and I cleaned up the rough edges left by the bandsaw to get a decent round faceplate. Using a Jacob's chuck to mount a Forstner bit, I drilled out the center of the faceplate. The Craftsman lathe has a 3/4 inch 16 TPI shaft. I centered a 2-inch faceplate to the back of the disc as a guide to keep the tap square when cutting threads. Tapping wood, much easier than tapping the carbide tip lathe tools. The 2-inch faceplate was removed and the disc was threaded onto the old lathe. Using a flat edge and a pencil, I marked the high spots and used the machine as a lathe for the last time. I used the carbide tip tools to smooth the surface and a cabinet scraper to finish it off. The next step in the project was to create a work table to support pieces while sanding. I ripped some pieces a little longer than the width of the disc and about 5 inches tall. I used clamps to hold the piece together while I pre-drilled. The walls were 1 sheet thick, and the bottom was 2 pieces thick, but one was narrower, which created rabbets for the sides to be supported. Everything was then glued and screwed together. I got a rubbing of the shape of the old banjo mount for the bolt holes. Here I'm centering and marking the bolt holes and drilling them out. The astute out there might realize this was actually the first step in the project, but I reordered the build process to reflect a reasonable person rather than the order my addled mind put things together. I cut 2 squares slightly over the 12-inch disc. Then, using copious amounts of glue and clamps, I laminated the 2 squares together. I hand-planed one edge and cleaned off the remaining glue squeeze out with the table saw. I clamped down the tabletop to the box and sank some screws to secure it. A little of the plastic was folded back from the self-adhesive sandpaper disc. The tacky edge was aligned and the backer removed, and then the disc was pressed into place. And what is a woodworking project without a little bit of sanding? The sanding eraser also worked great. There are a number of enhancements which I've thought of since completing the build, such as dust collection and a tilting table. I might switch out the solid wood disc for plywood depending on how it handles the humidity changes. But overall, I think the design will be quite functional with the 90-degree table and being able to slide it out of the way for smoothing segmented layers of a bowl. I'd like to thank Mitch from Maiden Wood for hosting the competition. He's a great woodworker, and I'd recommend subscribing to his channel to see the projects he works on. Also, a big thank you for the sponsors Mitch has lined up: Axminster Tools and Machinery, TimberCon, and Inventables. I'd also like to say no geckos were harmed or even used in this project, despite my best effort to find a pair to power the sander. Thanks for watching. Comment below if you have any thoughts or questions. Give the video a thumbs up and share if you enjoyed it or found it useful. Subscribe if you'd like to see future projects, and God bless.